Today's review is the 2020 release of Dune Imperium, designed by Paul Dennen, who is most known for being the designer of Clank. The artists are Clay Brooks and Nate Storm, and the publisher is Direwolf, which is a publishing group also best known for Clank. It plays 1 to 4 players in 60 to 120 minutes, which, it's about 120 minutes. And BGG has it as a weight of 2.90. Dune Imperium is a deck-building worker placement hybrid that is set in the Dune movie universe, the Dune unreleased movie by Denis Villeneuve, which was supposed to come out in fall of 2020 and has now been pushed to fall of 2021. And the game was supposed to come out simultaneously with the movie, but instead we just get the game because the movie got pushed a year because of COVID. And so this is a Dune game, but you will not recognize that Thufir Hawat is a woman, I believe, in this game. And it's all based on the actors. Luckily, it's not just images from the movie. It's actually art, but based on the likenesses of actors in the movie. There are some characters that I'm not familiar with. There are some images that are not what I would expect to have seen for Dune. So it is a little bit of a spoiler for the movie in some aspects, especially the image of the Kwisatz Haderach, which looks like some sort of a DMT trip. And I'm very curious if that is actually what the Kwisatz Haderach is going to look like in the movie. It looks like Galactus or something, giant walking through space.
Well, it's probably like a dream sequence kind of thing. Like even Lynch's Doom had oh, I take the spice. Yeah. Oh, I'm traveling within. Blah blah blah.
But yeah, it is interesting to be playing a game based on a movie that doesn't exist yet, or at least for the public, it doesn't exist. But yeah, Paul, tell us about Dune Imperium. Break it down for us.
Well, it is your. How should I put it? If I were to be as reductive as possible with it, it is basically Dominion plus a board, and a little asymmetry. So basically, it's a 1 to 4 player game. Everyone has a faction. Each faction has a unique power, both in ongoing and in when you play a certain card. And you basically draw 5 cards. You play. Oh, okay. Let me. You draw 5 cards. You have what are called agents. These agents are pieces that you put on the board, and when you put your pieces on the board, you take an action. You take an action with that board.
Pretty basic worker placement stuff.
Absolutely. And you have 2 of those, and once you're out of agents, you show the rest of your cards, and the rest of your cards will have a certain number of points depending on what card they are, and with those points, influence points, you buy another card.
Or as many cards as you want. Yeah,
exactly. And then once everyone has done that, there's a combat phase that is part of the board, and whoever wins that combat phase gets the first prize, and second and third, and then you repeat until someone gets 10 points.
Right. So, and that's an interesting end game condition, because it can end in 2 ways. It can either there's 10 conflict cards, and if you get to the last conflict card, whoever has the most points win. The tiebreaker, of course, is whoever has the most spice. If you know Dune, that makes sense. Otherwise, it's the first person to 10 automatically wins the game, which is sort of has a feel. And Trey pointed this out, and I agree with him. It has a Settlers of Catan feel to it, in that. Everybody's scores are going to be pretty close in the end, and it's sort of going to come down to any hidden points that you have in cards and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is quite literally deck building plus worker placement, and whatever you're imagining when you think of deck building and worker placement, that's just those 2 things are together.
It's right.
It's very, very simple worker placement. Place a worker. You can only place a worker, as Paul said, depending on if the card you have played has the location that worker can go to. And then, sometimes the cards will have a bonus as well. And then, yeah, at the end, after you've played your workers, or even if you don't want to play all your workers, you can just dump your whole hand in front of you and add up all the invisible money points you get, just like Dune, and then go shopping and buy cards, throw them in your discard. When your deck's empty, shuffle your discard into your deck. And that's how deck building works. Um, yeah, so I mean, there are a couple of cool things that this game does. Now, we reviewed earlier in the year Lost Ruins of Arnak,
Yes.
which also is quite
Hybrid.
literally deck building plus worker placement. This is very similar to that, which is funny because we've got sort of two versions of a very similar game with different themes. You know, Indiana Jones versus Dune, actually Dune versus not actually Indiana Jones, and their goals are very similar. Clank was an interesting deck building hybrid as well. It wasn't worker placement, but it was kind of you're moving your meeple into a dungeon and trying to get out as quickly as possible, and there's a push your luck element to it. So it makes sense that the designer would be playing with that. But yeah, things that it does interesting, of course, is asymmetrical powers. I'm always more excited by a game if it has asymmetrical powers. And as any Dune game would, you can play as certain members of different houses. So you can play as Call Me By Your Name, or you can play as Drax, or, oh, I'm sorry, actually, it says Paul Atreides here. And, and the Beast. That is one of the funny things, that having not seen the movie, you can clearly recognize the actors that these cards are trying to portray.
Sure.
And yeah, it just sort of looks like you've chosen Drax or the guy from Call Me By Your Name. But yeah, each one of them is going to have a rule-breaking power, or some of them are ongoing throughout the game, and some of them are one-time uses. Paul Atreides has a very interesting power where you can always look at the top of your deck at any time. He knows the future. He has prescience. And then some of them, like the Beast, Glossu Raban, just starts the game with an extra spice and extra dollar, and that's it. But then everybody also has a signet ring power. There's one of your 10 cards in your starting deck has a little signet ring on it, and anytime you play that card, you get to do your signet ring power. Very simple, most of them. For example, Paul Atreides is just draw a card. Some of them are a little more interesting, like the Beast. I'll go back to that one. If you have alliance with a faction, you get to add 1 or 2 cubes to your garrison. So that's the most interesting thing to me about the game, is the whole combat element. So while you are trying to build your deck and cull your cards and do your basic deck building stuff, you are also every round thinking about a potential conflict. So there's a deck of 10 conflict cards, and every round you draw one off the top. They get the rewards of them become increasingly valuable towards the end of the game because they're sort of level 1s, level 2s, and level 3s. Sometimes you'll be fighting over a point. Again, we said the first to 10 win, so those points can be quite valuable. The level 3 conflict cards often have 2 points on them, so that can be really important. But how that's decided is by who has the most cubes in the conflict. So cubes are another sort of resource that you're working with. Some action spaces give you cubes that go to your garrison, and some have a little crossed swords combat symbol that allow you to move cubes from your garrison into the conflict, which is sort of this space on the board where all the cubes mingle. And then at the end of the round, when everybody's passed, you add up all the points in the middle plus points you may have on cards. Each cube is worth 2. Some of your cards have 1 on them when you dump your whole hand, and you add them all up, and whoever got the most conflict points wins the number 1 reward. Second place gets the second, and if you're playing with 4 players, third place gets the third. And yeah, those are going to be goods or sometimes even points. And so that's a really interesting mix because certain spots on the board allow you to add cubes to that. You could totally just ignore a conflict in the whole round, but then you're making it quite cheap for other people to get what are potentially very strong rewards. And yeah, I really like that element of it. What do you think about the way the whole conflict thing works?
I think it's very straightforward and simple. And I think it is really, what's the word I want to use? It's very in keeping with the game. Like, it fits the tone of the game. Like,
Yeah.
So like
The game or Dune?
the game itself seems to be at a certain access point. And I feel like this, I don't want to say simple, but this, it is, but like it's straightforwardness of how it all works out fits the game. And I feel like, when you play your intrigue cards, do we talk about that yet?
Nope.
There are also some other cards you can get that give you instant bonuses or increased combat or end game points. And anyway, like, you can play when you play combat cards, like there's still that fog of war, but it's not so crazy that you can't anticipate it. So I think it feels, you know, within keeping of what the tone of the game is trying to achieve.
Yeah, there are some. So yeah, let's talk about the intrigue deck. The intrigue deck is probably my least favorite part of the game. So it's a deck of chaos, basically. A lot of so there are 4 factions in the game, and in order to go to a space attached to one of these factions, so there's 2 worker placement spots for each of the 4 factions. You have to play a card that has that faction symbol on it. And then when you go to one of those spaces, you improve your standing with that faction. When you've improved it twice, you get a victory point. When you've improved it 4 times, if you're the first person to do it 4 times, you get a temporary victory point that you could lose when people get more influence with that faction than you. If somebody gets to the very top, they keep it forever. So that's a good way. There's 8 victory points just sitting on the board right there if you can get up all the way on all 4 factions, which you won't be able to do. So yeah, getting those factions and moving up on them is important. I just lost my train of thought. What was I talking about in terms of the factions, Paul?
Intrigue.
Right. So yes, the Bene Gesserit is one of those 4 factions. Thank you very much. And the Bene Gesserit is all about getting intrigue cards. So there's a deck of chaos. Intrigue cards can either be plot cards, which are like one-time use things you can use on your turn. There can be end game points, which is just I think there's only a couple in the game, so they're not too egregious, but it's basically like you have another point. So that's sort of the victory point cards in Catan element. It's like, oh, at the end of the game, ha ha ha, look what I have in my hand. You thought you were winning, but I have some hidden points here. And then there are the combat cards, which I don't know. I don't know if I like them. They're just, you just have to, I mean, it just sort of puts an element in the game of like, you never are sure if you're winning, which yes, that's a fine design development, but it's also like, it just causes too much to happen, and I don't know. It just makes it a little too chaotic, I think, and not necessarily in a fun Dune-y way, but in just sort of a like, well, I know there's the card that gives you +4 combat, so I have to kind of, if I really am going to commit my whole turn to putting 6 cubes in the middle there, I might as well put 2 more in to make sure that I beat the card. You didn't have the card, so I wasted a whole turn doing that. Okay, great, that's fun. So I mean, like, there's just enough swinginess in those that it like puts an element of like, well, if I'm going to do something, I have to do something a lot in order to do it. And I mean, I don't know, it's a level of chaos that's not necessarily very strategic to me, and nor tactical. It's just sort of chaos, and especially the ones that give you extra points. And I don't know, I just don't know if
it's almost like a dice roll.
A little bit. It is. It might as well just be a dice roll. Yeah, that's true. So there's that deck. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoy it. It's a bog standard deck builder, but it does it well. There's all the typical things you would imagine in a deck builder. So there's 2 strategies of, are you going to go big money and race for these sort of victory point cards? So there's a card in the game that costs 9, which is a lot of money to be able to put together. And when you buy it, you get a victory point. But that card's pretty useless in your hand, sort of like the duchy cards or whatnot, and
Dominion.
So you could just go a game where you're making sure you buy at least 1 or 2 of those every round. 2 would be quite difficult, but it is possible because there are cards that lower the cost of it. Or you're going like pure conflict, and you're really just racing towards winning the conflict and having a big thing, and then it just becomes sort of a race to see who can build their engines faster with that. And then a lot of it comes down to, as in most deck builders, who draws better and who gets luckier on getting those combo cards together at the same time. What else does the game do that's interesting? I mean, yeah, the worker placement stuff is fine. There are some, I do sort of like that some of the spots have the combat symbols on them. And anytime you go to a combat symbol, you can add up to 2 of your cubes to the conflict. Those are interesting. I did find there are some good decisions in how I'm fighting over those places, but also the cards you're buying really decide where you're going to be going as well, because those cards limit where you can go. There are some early game decisions of, am I going to go for my 3rd worker? So you have a 3rd worker that you can buy 1 time in the game for 8 money. But if you have a third worker, then you have less cards when you dump your hand, which is going to give you less money to buy more cards. So you may think, well, worker placement game, I better race to that third worker. Family growth is the best thing I can do. Not necessarily in this game, because if you have that too early, you're never going to have very much money in your hand to buy more cards, because you're going to be playing 3 of your 5 cards every turn, which is a big difference between playing 3 of your 5 and 2 of your 5 in terms of money you're going to have to buy cards. And the cards are pretty expensive. So that's an interesting choice. There's also you can go to I forget what it's called, but you basically go to it once. It costs $5, and then for the rest of the game, you have an extra $2 to spend every time you dump your hand to buy cards.
The Landsrad High Council.
There you go. That also can be very powerful to go early on, but that's a lot of money. $5 early on. It's a little bit of a tempo swing there, and there's some cool decisions to be made there. Spice is very valuable. There are a couple spots that in order to go to them, you have to spend spice. And spice is also the tiebreaker at the end of the game. I think this is a game that would often have 2 people hitting 10 at the same time. So spice can be, really just banking spice and making sure you have more of it than the other person can guarantee your victory. There's some cool stuff going on. And it's, it adds enough where to me, and I'll just say it now, it completely replaces Lost Ruins of Arnak. I would have no reason to have both in my collection personally, as I think they both do the same thing. And I think this is a much more interesting version of it because of the combat, because of the asymmetrical powers, because of the interesting things that it does with worker placements. I think it's also just a better design deck builder. So to me, of the 2 games this year that came out with the same sort of hybrid mechanics, to me, this is definitely better. And also because I enjoy the theme more. I'm always going to enjoy Dune more. But Paul, tell me what you think in terms of this as a Dune game.
Well, I will have to say that if you were to replace, if you were like, do you remember Rex? Is it called Rex? Yeah. Basically. So there's Dune, the Avalon
and
Hill.
Also called Rex Imperium, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. There's the Dune Avalon Hill game, and then there was the reskin called Rex or Rex Imperium. I can't remember. Basically the same mechanics. And by stripping away the Dune IP, never played it. It was just like, meh. This is it completely takes away from the Avalon Hill.
So it's called Rex Final Days of an Empire.
Okay, sure. And ultimately, with this game, if you were to take the Dune IP away and put any other IP that could,
or just random space,
actually like elves, like it's fantasy for Jake. I would say that it plays exactly the same and it would have the same feel. So as a Dune game,
would you like it more or less?
It would be neutral to me, because the Dune IP aspect does not really infuse into the game. It feels like there's an engine of a deck builder or whatever with a skin that is Dune, but it could be anything. They're not connected to me.
Yeah. I agree with that. It doesn't necessarily, the original board game of Dune really feels like Dune. And I don't even necessarily know why. It just really does. I think it's the insane level of asymmetry. When you think of Dune, you think of, just wildly different alien factions. The whole thing is about, trying to understand the ununderstandable sociologically between different cultures. And so it really gets that feeling of we are all alien to each other and have completely different powers.
And to that point, Dune is basically about intrigue. Dune, Game of Thrones, it's about people dealing with other people in oftentimes nefarious ways, in straightforward ways, whatever the case.
It's not as much about military power as about mental acuity.
Absolutely. And in the Avalon Hill game, though wildly asymmetrical and wildly unbalanced, it really captures that sense of intrigue in a way that this game doesn't even attempt to. This game. So
I guess the intrigue cards, oh no, I have +4 combat this round. Dune.
but you're not really interacting with people, right? Whereas like within the Avalon Hill game, you are forced to. There are times when you are forced into an alliance, and you might not even want to be in an alliance with this person, but you need to, or you're gonna die. And that tension, that choice is like integral in the Dune experience. Whereas here, you're always by yourself.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, there is no teaming together at all in any way. Yeah, so there's an interesting thing like so the Bene Gesserit in the original Avalon Hill game, at the beginning of the game, they pick a faction that they think is going to win. And if that faction wins, they lose and the Bene Gesserit actually win. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
That's the best thing ever.
And those guys have the lowest win rate, but when they win, oh,
It's the best. It's the
it feels
best
so
feeling.
good.
Yeah.
So,
So, and in this game, there's Baron Harkonnen has a power where at the beginning of the game, and it's clearly some sort of a nod to it, you choose two factions at secret, and there's special tokens here, and you choose them. And then at some point in the game, when you've put 4 troops in there, you reveal two of those factions, and you gain one influence with each of them. And it's just the level of how unexciting that is compared to the Bene Gesserit reveal at the end of the game. Like that to me shows the difference between which one feels like Dune and which one is just a skin.
yeah, no, I think like as we move into the final thoughts, like I mean, I think in the end, like this game is a very it's for what it is, like from for a deck builder plus a board, uh, it's great. I mean, it really delivers what it promises in that term. In fact, so much so where I was playing it and I go like, oh, I finally put my finger in it. I don't like deck builders. No, and don't misunderstand me. I can appreciate it. It's like I might not like goat cheese. I can appreciate good goat cheese, but like it turns out that it is not my jam or my cheese. And I was playing this game and it really crystallized. Oh, I don't like deck builders because in the end, deck builders put a level of convolution between me, the game I like to play between me and my opponents. Like there's this kind of like mechanical aspect that I'm it's not my jam, and that's totally fine. But like I don't resent this game for that, and in fact I'm grateful for the game for helping me identify that aspect.
Yeah.
But like so if you want a deck builder plus a board, I would wholly recommend this because it's an hour game for 2-player, probably hour and a half, hour 45 for 3.
Yeah.
And if you want that experience, this will deliver. It will absolutely deliver. Deck builder plus a little conflict. Nothing. I have no negative things to say about a game if you like this type of game. But like if you're looking for a Dune game, it falls for me 100% flat.
Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, maybe once we've seen the movie, there'll be a little more like, like an emotional connection to the images potentially. But yeah, now you said this game made you realize you don't necessarily like deck builders. I love deck builders. I've played them all. There's very few deck builders I haven't tried. I really enjoy deck building. I love Dominion. I think, but at this point, I'm at a point where it's like, if I'm going to play a deck builder, I'd like to have it be different than your average deck builder because feel like I've explored the design space of Dominion like deck builders, and there is nothing sort of new and exciting for me in discovery of that. And there is nothing new and exciting in Dune Imperium when it comes to deck building discovering. I really loved Taverns of Tiefenthal as a deck builder because to me that felt like a very different deck builder, and that's sort of what I'm looking for in deck builders now is something that's very different. This is just Dominion. It's just straight up the exact same
plus a board
strategies plus a board, right? But in terms of the deck building, right?
Absolutely.
I enjoyed the novelty at first of like, oh, so I have to play a card and that card decides what sort of worker placement spots I'm allowed to go to. That's fun. The order of I play them is fun. There are some cool new things there for sure. But the actual feeling of deck building and the decisions there, do I cull my deck? Do I go for a draw deck? Those are basic Dominion level decisions. Am I going to have a slim, mean deck that I'm drawing what I need every turn? Or am I going to decide to go for a deck that draws a lot? So I'm always getting a lot of cards and having a higher chance of getting what I want. Do I want to go big money in order to buy the high point cards that are going to help me win the game? Or do I want to go more balanced so that I can start putting combos together so I can buy the cheaper cards that are going to help me? I mean, it's just your basic Dominion decisions. And they're all here. So this is a game that I would recommend highly to people who deck building is something that is new and novel to them. I'd also recommend it to somebody who, for worker placement, is new and novel to them. This is a combination Taco Bell Pizza Hut. It's not it's not the best tacos, it's not the best pizza, but you can get tacos and pizza here. um, and they're both good. And if you don't know, if you've never had great pizza or great tacos, you're probably gonna love it. You're probably gonna think it's great, and you're not wrong. It's solid,
Yeah.
and you can get them both there. But if you've traveled the world tasting every pizza, you're gonna be like, yeah, okay. I mean, this definitely is pizza.
And tacos.
And tacos. I can't disagree with you. And you know what? I came hungry for pizza and tacos, and you gave me pizza and tacos, so I'm not mad at you. But not necessarily sure if this is my favorite pizza or tacos I've ever had.
No, I mean it's very interesting because like when we first played it, like 2-player, like we both talked about how this is more fun than it deserves to be.
Right.
Uh, and
yeah, on a turn to turn basis, we were both having fun with the decision space.
And I do wonder if it actually plays better with 2. And don't misunderstand me. Like, yeah, you still have all the problems with, like, if you're a seasoned deck builder or a seasoned worker placement person, blah blah. But in the end, like, I think with that speed, it's not overstaying its welcome.
Like, combat becomes a little okay, you'll take this one, I'll take the next one.
Exactly. And so
the difference between first and second in combat is so huge. It's like 1 point or 2 money. It's a huge difference. So it's like, if you're not going to win first, you don't bother. So I think in a 2-player, you do end up sort of just taking turns.
And because I found, like, when we were playing 3-player, I was going like, oh, I never get that feel bad moment as Trey would describe it. But like, I do feel like, this is not doing what I wanted to do. I wonder if, like, if you're, like, say, a couple and you are going like, oh, like, I'd like to play a half-hour game before bed, and just churn through this as far as a decompress. I could totally see that. Like, I think there's value in this game. It's just not for our group. And I really, if you're a Dune fan, and if you're looking for a Dune game, this is not it.
Yeah, it's a skin. It doesn't feel like Dune to me. At least in terms of, like, where we're all LARPing Dune. Like, there's no LARPing here, really. Sure. And yeah, and having factions that are banding together and then betraying each other, to me, is what Dune is. And so there's games that do that better. Yeah, so I to me, it's, if it's a 6, it's fine. I enjoyed it. I believe it will stay in my collection as a solid entry level worker placement deck builder with a fun theme. Whether or not it achieves that theme, I still like Dune. Just seeing Dune makes me happy.
Oh, you know what? I also say this could be a fairly good gateway game.
Yeah, absolutely. For people who aren't very familiar with, like, this is a great, like, I was actually thinking this is a great way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with a new player. It's like, if you're new to the hobby and you play Dune Imperium, boom, you now understand 2 of the major mechanics of our hobby. You understand deck building, you understand worker placement. That opens up a whole world of games that you can play.
Yeah. And so, and I think what it's what's the word? Its advantages, its bonuses are that it's actually very clear. It's not very convoluted.
Yeah.
So like, in either the deck
It's an easy
building,
teach.
exactly, either the deck building or the worker placement. And if you're introducing someone to these concepts for the first time, I would, in fact, I would actually say that this game would be great for that.
Yeah, I totally
So
agree with that.
so if you're trying to like convert your partner into playing a game, like if they're not
Mhm.
a game player, and you go, here, we can play this, and in fact it has combat too, so it has three things.
Yeah.
And I would say this is a gateway game. This is a 7-8 level gateway game.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of player count, I do agree. 2 is solid with this one. It has a dummy player, but it's really very simple to use and enjoyable. It's just a deck of cards. You flip it over and you block a space every round, pretty much. Very simple to do, and does actually create tension and make it like, oh gosh, like even if my opponent I know isn't going there, I don't know what the deck is going to do. I better take that spot now if I really need it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it very, very easy. You don't have to worry. This is not a coin level AI bot that you're going to have to spend 5 minutes going through a flow chart to figure out what they're going to do on their next turn. You just flip a card and block a spot. So yeah, really solid as a 2-player game. It does play solo. I haven't played it. I read the rules. It's very similar. It's a slightly more complicated version of the 2-player bot. But it wasn't interesting enough to me to try it as a solo. If I'm gonna play a solo, I like my solos to be pretty meaty and heavy.
Sure. Make a meal of it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's Dune Imperium. I think it deserves an audience. I think this is a game that will do quite well with a lot of people out there.
Yeah, I think in discussing this, I would recommend it slightly more than I initially thought, because I forget that that people are entering the hobby. Sometimes I forget that.
Oh yeah, no, we often and yes, those are more. There are more of them than us, that's for sure.
Sure.
And when the Face Dancer expansion comes out, I will definitely give it a whirl.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.